Live from New Hampshire, it's time for the Science Cafe!
Learn about the latest technologic innovations today.
And you don't have to pay.
Expert panels with advanced degrees are sure to satisfy your curiosity.
Did we mention it's free?
And if you think you'll find a better time than this, then come on down and test your hypothesis. Cause you're gonna learn a lot if you wanna stay down at the Science Cafe.
Hey, I have a question way in the back here.
First is that I want to hear a little bit more about the environmental impact of those batteries, especially the newer technologies that have created some problems. What do you expect from that? What's happening now? The second question is about the financing. It used to be that the state had enabling legislation that communities could adopt that would allow the communities to not increase the taxation on solar systems, things that do improve the value of the house, but in order to not discourage the development of solar systems, towns could adopt that. Is that still in place, and does it have an effect?
Yes, what you mentioned is available town by town. Each town has the ability to decide for their townspeople whether or not they do want to exempt that taxable increase from solar. So the recognition that solar will increase your home's value is there. It is up to the town to decide on what level they would like to tax that. So I usually carry a chart with me. The chart is rarely updated. I have varying degrees of accuracy from 2017 and 2018. But basically I can go around and see which town might have a complete exemption. So they look at it and say, hey, it will increase your value, but guess what? You're free and clear, we're not going to increase your taxes. There are other towns that will do something in the realm of 50%, 60%, 80%. Again, it's up to the town. And there are other towns that will say, whoa, if it's going to improve the value of your home, we're taxing you on it. So it really depends on the town. Particularly Merrimack is a town that I work in quite frequently, who has a total backwards look at the whole thing. But basically, they have something coming up on their ballots in spring this year. And every time I meet with somebody who's within the Merrimack area, I say, please get out and support the change. Because really what it is at the town level too, you have your selectmen, you have your townspeople. Sometimes there's misinformation. Sometimes we don't understand the true complexity of it. And when somebody's explained the right way and educated, you go, oh, that makes sense. Why are we taxing the heck out of solar? So again, we just want to get people out, get them educated. And in your case here, yes, that exists from town to town. And really, it's one of those things that for a long time we've always advocated for any of our customers. Please always speak up when solar is on the docket in the town. It's just something that you want to advocate for because again, you'll just have those that are not educated on it making the decision and saying, hey, it's just like putting a shed in the backyard, let's tax it, you know? We see that a lot. I'll let the others jump in on that in a minute, but to speak to the batteries, I think it was an article just last week. There's a major manufacturer or organization, and I believe it's the combination of three major organizations out in the European and Asian market that will start a recycling process for batteries. Now, it's something that we have always, within the industry, has been talked about, and they have always theorized on how this would be accomplished. Apparently, one of these companies has some proprietary technology on being able to utilize some various chemicals to separate everything from the batteries when they're all said and done. But what we're seeing now is just the beginnings of that recycling process. We see it on the solar panel scale as well. Europe, again, being a leader, being somebody who's done this at scale before we did, about 10, 15 years ahead of us. They're about 10 years ahead of us on the recycling side of it as well. If we get into the impact of the batteries, truly, we're mining for, rare earth elements. I mean, it's an important factor, right? We want to look at it. But when you run the calculations on looking at an electric vehicle, looking at a home storage device. If you look from cradle to grave, full cycle on that device, it will always outpace whatever other option is from a carbon footprint, from an impact negative on the environment. The battery will still win. What's really nice is that we're starting to see in the EV market, the electric vehicle market, you're starting to see a second life for electric vehicle batteries as home storage batteries, right? So what's unique is, any of the batteries that are available for us today here in the home, they all have about a 10-year warranty on them. They're talking about having about 70 to 50% of their energy density in that 10, 12, 15-year period. That doesn't mean the battery's no good. It just means it has less power to it, right? So again, as we kind of creep into this next phase of energy storage, we're going to start to see that, there are multi-uses, and we're going to really see that we're going to start to really take something from one location, say it's an electric vehicle, and we might pull it out and use it for another 5 to 10 years in the home. And then we're going to figure out a way to continually utilize these devices until we've gotten everything from them, and then send them to the recycler.
One of the things that disturbs me as I've really thought about this property tax is what you're talking about is a piece of equipment that depreciates in time, and no town is sort of considering the notion that this is a piece of depreciable equipment. It loses value. So how can you say that it's going to be the same tax rate for this piece of property that has a decreasing value because its output is decreasing? It just isn't right, and that's one of the things that is not being addressed at all.
So I didn't even consider that. I looked at it from the economics and environmental side. The economic side for me was I've got an electric car. I drive 100 miles a day for work. I was spending about $220 a month in gasoline. Get an electric car, I spend about $110 a month in electricity added onto my home electric bill. That made pretty good sense to me. I went with the solar because I realized, okay, now my electric bill is plus 110. I went from averaging right around $100 a month to averaging just about $200, to about $200 a month over the course of the year. And at $100 a month, or just under $100 a month, I hadn't really thought solar was going to be as much of a benefit. Once I nearly doubled my electric use, I figured that would certainly be a better payoff for me. As far as the taxes, I don't know what my town's going to do. I didn't even ask. I got the permit to put the thing up. I installed it. I'm producing. When the tax bill comes, they're going to assess it as they're going to assess it. There wasn't anything I was going to do because there was no ballot thing to vote on or anything. For my case, it's an additional structure, but it's strictly to hold the panels. Had I put them on my roof, which was not viable for me because I had tall trees to the east and my roof is a dormered gambrel that faces south, so there just wasn't enough real estate to put the number of panels I felt I needed. I didn't even consider the RECs because I heard the RECs were pretty miserably low for how much you were getting for RECs, but it's what, $27 a REC now? I'm doing the monitoring. I'm sending in the information. So so every megawatt that I produce, I'm getting another $27 that I didn't count into my calculations when I did the whole solar system. So by going at it simply with what was I going to save on electricity, and I calculated that based upon how much electricity I was using per year and how much I was expecting to produce, and that's another guesstimation. I mean, there's tools out there that'll tell you what's going to happen. You look at the shading, you figure all these things out, and the 1.25 number is an approximation that's going to work for the average. There's going to be outliers each side of that. So I looked at it and said, well, I'm using about 12 megawatts a year. Let me put in a system that's going to produce 3/4 of that, and I'll see where I land. So I'm not producing enough power to cover everything. I also opted not to put batteries in simply because of the cost. At some point, I'm hoping that the car manufacturer for the electric car that I have will put in vehicle to grid, so I'll be able to use my car as my battery backup. That's not the case at the moment, but I anticipate 4 or 5 years down the road, there'll be enough cars being produced with batteries, the battery technology will improve enough that the cost will come down to be something more reasonable, and it's at that point that I'll probably go ahead and put battery backup in.
it's almost 100% correct. Because you have to understand the way the system works. You have insurance companies, and the insurance companies dictate to the firemen what the fire code should be, and the firemen then dictate to the electrical board, and now you have the National Electric Code. So that's the path of how all these rules get written. It's all about money for insurance companies. That's the way it's designed. So that said, there is an inverter. There is one particular brand of inverter. Like if you're doing a ground mount, one of the things I would do is I would probably suggest to the customer that they should consider using an SMA. SMA has something called a secure power, SPS, secure power system. Simply, it's an outlet that when the sun is shining, even if the grid goes down, you can go down and flip this switch and that inverter continues to operate. Okay? It only produces 8 amps per inverter compared to 11 amps for a battery backup system. But it produces 8 amps and you can continue to operate as long as the sun is shining, even if there's no grid power. So that is one small alternative that does it without batteries. And the cost is inconsequential. It's $130 additional or some very small thing. And the other thing is, regarding the 80% shade, I saw the 80%, I was trying to remember what it was. It is not a necessity. So the Public Utility Commission wrote this rule in so that the customer would know. And so today, on the latest version of the Public Utility Commission, it indicates what is the TSR, the total solar refraction, something like that. And so basically, they want to know roughly how efficient it is. And so that appears on there. But if you're 74%, they'll still give it to you. Okay, it's not an issue. You still get that $1,000.
Generally 6 to 8 years payback, maybe 10. What's the life, on average, of solar cells if you're going to put them on your roof? Just briefly, please.
Longer than you'll live.
More than 20 years or 30 years?
The warranty on most of the panels is either 20 or 25 years, and they're still going to produce after that time, according to everything I've read. It's just a matter of how much it'll produce.
Okay.
So to elaborate a little bit on it, my solar panels are 375 watt panels. My microinverters are peak 295 watts. So doing the math, on a sunny day where I'm getting maximum sun hitting my solar panels, I could have an individual panel producing 375 watts. I'm only going to be able to use 295 watts of that. I did that simply because the cost of the panels, when I went from a 320 or 345, because there were recommendations to go a little bit above what the inverter could produce. At the 375, that was the 345 was really the best value that I found. I went to order them and they were out of stock. They gave me a good deal on the 375, so I said I'll take that. So make sure you wheel and deal if you're going to be doing this yourself. But I did that so that the stuff that I've read, and once again, I'm not an expert on this, but the stuff that I've read say that just like the lithium batteries, there's a degradation over time that happens. And on the solar panels, I read that it was 1/4 to 0.5% loss per year. You may see a little bit more the first year, and then after that, it flattens out to a 1/4 to 0.5% loss over time. So I figured that at around 10 years, if I, with my panels being above what my inverters are, it's going to be 10 to 12 years minimum before I'm seeing any less production than what I'm seeing right now. By going with the microinverters, I can also add to my system and just add some microinverters. I don't have to add a whole new string inverter or other things. So there's a lot of pieces and parts that you can get lost in if you're trying to size out and figure out what you want to do if you're going to do it yourself. The hooray.org website gives you a fantastic walkthrough on how to do things. Let me warn you up front, there's a lot there. I went and I read through the how-to 2 or 3 times and then decided I'm going to take it one piece at a time because there's a lot you can bury yourself in, but it's doable. It's just a matter of do it a piece at a time. Find out how much energy you're using. Ask the power company to give you your 3 years history. Figure out how much per year on average. Size the system, and then you can start walking down the list to say, okay, what do I want to do? The benefit to going with one of these guys is they know all those options. They know all those choices. And they can lay that out for you without you having to go do a lot of research. But if you're doing it yourself, I know so much more about my system than my other neighbor up the hill who had it installed because I did all the research. And I wanted to know what all of this stuff meant. I calculated the line loss for being 120 feet from my house and sized the wire to be a little bit larger than what I needed. I have a little less loss, but I also have the ability to add a few more panels and not have to replace the wire.
Almost every panel that's out there today is a minimum of 25 years. Some are, super, for lack of a better word, super premium panels will give you 30 years. Okay, so there are different models that are available. What's the expected real life in terms of usable power? It's 40 to 50 years. How do we know that? It's because National Renewable Energy Laboratory out in New Mexico tests these things. They've been testing for 25, 30 years from when the first panels were being built. So we have real numbers. This is not just artificially made up. So, and then secondly, the expected value at about 25 years has been typically around 80% of the useful day one power is warranted to be, the panel will still produce 80% at 25 years. But recently, companies like LG coming out with these wonderful, wonderful panels, they're pushing at 25 years 92.5% efficiency still.
And to share with us, how does this solar work? Tell us what the monocrystal versus polycrystal, what are the things that we read? And if you know a little bit about it, what's going to change in the next few years that might make it better?
At the simplest level, just keeping it basic, you have a solar collector, your solar panel, photovoltaic panel. The silicon that is inside that panel has been created in a way that it is doped with a different charge on opposite sides. What will happen is it absorbs the sun. It will excite an electron within that cell. That excited electron is the piece of electricity that we all want to capture and get into our home as quick as possible. That electron needs to follow a path. That path is the electric line. That electric line will run to an inverter. The inverter is commonly associated as the workhorse of the solar electric system, if you would. The panels, they lie out there. They don't do anything. No moving parts. They absorb the sun. As that excited electron moves through that electric line, it needs to be converted because it's currently DC energy. DC energy is what we find in our batteries. It's what we find in our car. It's why we can't use those devices in our home. So we have to invert that energy. The inverter is going to do that for us. It's going to create it AC energy. Going beyond now the production of that solar, how does it work for you in the home? Your main service panel in your house is powered with that electricity from your solar electric system. Much like this cup on the table, you have your electric loads. Your electric loads in this home, as long as we're pouring in water and we're drinking from it, we're using those electric loads. As soon as I put this cup down and I stop drinking, we're going to fill, we're going to overflow. That overflow is what's going back to the utility. All right, so we're making more electricity than we're using. The utility's getting that energy. We've talked a little bit about net metering today. In most cases, the main utilities in the state, Eversource, Unitil, and Liberty, will, over a month's time, let you give them energy, take energy, back and forth, and at the end of the month, they'll say, here's the difference. George alluded to New Hampshire Electric Co-op earlier. They play the game a little bit differently. They're co-op owned, so they get to play by different rules. Basically, that's how our net metering system works. That's how, in the simplest form, solar on your roof is going to produce that energy. The inverter is going to make it usable. We're going to feed it into the main service panel. We're going to use it in all of our devices, and we're going to offset our energy. Simple, simple.
The recommendation is not to build a system that's well above what your annual usage is going to be, because you're going to take longer to pay off a system, and the return on that is going to be paid back at a lower rate than what you're buying the electricity for. So trying to get it as close as possible, plus or minus 10% of what your needs are, is going to optimize you not having to buy as much electricity, but also not overspending on your system and getting a reduced amount back from the electric company for the excess that you provided them.
So the short version instead is simply, we have this wonderful thing which when it was first created at Bell Labs was called a solar battery. And that's what the patent said, all that good stuff. So really, it's just operating like a battery. That's the most simplistic notion. And then you have the magic box. And the inverter is called the magic box because what does it do? It transforms it to grid power. But most importantly, it must turn off within 30 seconds of the grid going down. That's so nobody gets killed. You have a lineman outside your house, you're responsible for that. And so that really is a big deal. And there are rules regarding that are part of the electric code, part of other instructions. There are fire codes. There's all kinds of things that govern this. And so as professionals, our job is to understand all the nuances. Understand the nuances. For example, if you're doing, and I know you're all here for residential, but commercial projects for small business are like the greatest thing that you could ever imagine, because we're not talking about 6 to 8 years. We're talking about typically 1 to 3 years in which you're going to get your system fully paid for, and now you've got 40 to 50 years of free power. I mean, woo, right? I mean, this is really a big deal.
About the life being 20 to 30 years, and I assume when the panels need to be replaced, you replace the panels, not the brackets. If I have to re-roof my house, the shingles, then it's like a reinstall. Does it make any sense, instead of re-shingling, to put in a metal roof and then the whole thing is permanent?
This is a common question for me. It's one that, George must deal with as much as well. A lot of times, one of the biggest concerns is the condition of your roof. Where are we at currently, right? If we start knowing that we have a product on our roof that should last 25, 30 years, let's say, but we're 10 or 15 years into that roof, well, we're halfway through it, right? If we now put another product on it that's going to last 25, 30, 40 years, well, there's going to be a moment where we go, this has to come off. I've got to replace what's under it, right? So a lot of times my conversations circle around, are we going to be the ones in this home? Is it our problem? I say it's our moral dilemma, right? I don't like kicking the can down the road, but I put it out there and I say, is it going to be your problem? Is it the next person's problem? I don't want to make it anybody's problem, but we talk about it, right? And the reason I bring it up like that is because if I know we're, say, more than 10 years into the life of a shingle, I want to advocate for replacing that roof now so that it's not a problem later, right? And it behooves you, it behooves the next owner, and it's something that in the selling of the home, if it's not going to be your home for the full life of that system, it's documented. I replaced this roof, I added solar, here's the timeline, right? So that works out really great. And that's how we try to always educate the homeowner. Your mention of metal roof, though, I love that. Metal roofs are awesome. With the caveat, standing seam versus corrugated. Corrugated tends to be the wavier one that you see on most barns, right? We put them on homes, they're fine. But they're usually affixed by hardware, right? A standing seam is as it sounds. Your sheets come together, they have a crimp seam that holds them together. They do have some hardware, but it's all underneath and it's usually all connected. It gives you the opportunity to do what we call a penetration-free installation. You're actually just utilizing the standing seams on the roof with particular brackets, clamp onto that standing seam, and now you have almost what's called a floating system, right? Because now it's not actually anchored into the house, it's anchored onto the roof. Roof is a huge point. Earlier in its age, the better. Metal roof, if it's standing seam, awesome.
I'd actually like to add to the question as opposed to the answer. I have read, I didn't do a roof install, so I don't have this knowledge, but I have read that when the solar panels are put up on the roof is not getting the traditional wear and tear. So will the roof underneath the solar panels actually last longer than originally planned?
Another awesome question. Very, very good point to make, right? So we look at a roof of shingles, right? Where are we putting these solar panels? We're putting them on the sunny side, right? So that is the side that's getting the most abuse. We can now look at that and we can say, well, heck, we're putting solar panels over this roof. It's going to be a roof over our roof, right? It's going to protect our shingles. Yes, but the chances, and especially now with some of the more recent electric codes in terms of the restrictions on what we can put for our panels, and just being that the panel itself is a fixed building block, if you would, and it's not going to match perfectly for every roof surface that's out there. And what I'm getting at is we can't cover every inch of every roof that we are on, right? So what does that mean? If we put panels on a roof, can we say that the panels will slow the aging of the roof? Yeah, we've got a ton of pictures of going back to systems 2 years old, 5 years old, 10 years old. Pull the panels up and it's like pulling up the rug on the wood floor, you know? Holy moly, look at that. But the perimeter of the roof is usually what's going to age first, right? You know, we have our ridge caps, we have our corners, we have our valleys. Those are our failure points. It's not the main field of our roof. So again, can we make that argument? Great argument. But we want to look at it from a realistic point of view and say, well, even though we've put 20 panels on this roof, there's still 18 inches at the top of the roof we can't cover, and maybe there's 10 inches on this side and 10 inches on that side. So that's still going to age. So again, it's just information.
We use kind of three standards, and that is 1 to 7 years, except for 2 brands of shingles. Not a question. We'll put the solar on. There's 2 brands that we know fail, and periodically we'll go to a house and somebody has this particular brand, and we know right away that even if it's got 3 years, it's not going to last 7. There's some really bad shingles out there. So that's the first thing. Second, 7 to 10 years. That's where you're going to put your man on the roof. He's going to walk around and see how crispy it is. Okay, and then 10 years, it's almost without a doubt. Replace it. Spend the money. It really is going to be a good investment for you. And so those are just kind of the 3 things. And then the unspoken thing, which we haven't heard about at all, which is solar shingles. The imaginary thing out there.
You brought it up.
I know. As I said, Elon Musk, I'm not a fan because of this. You know, I mean, what was it, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now? And a BIPV, a building integrated photovoltaic, has been around for 10 or 15 years. It's been around a long time. And a lot of people have tried to solve this. And he's gotten some novel ideas about having certain pieces that don't do anything, so that all the roof looks wonderful, even though you've got some fake ones. And he's talked about how it was supposed to cost beyond parity, it was going to be cheaper, and all of that, and it's still running, what, about twice or 2.5 times, somewhere around there. So, yeah, some year. And I'll just tell you one quick one, and that is I had an inspector tell me, I don't want to drive, it was an assistant inspector, I don't want to drive down the street and see solar on the front of a house. They had a rule that said you could not put solar on any roof that faced the street, okay? Even if it was south-facing. And so fortunately, I got to work with the real inspector, and he said that's a bunch of hogwash, and they changed the rule in the town and things like that. But you have to be careful because lots of people are well-meaning and think, oh, we're going to make this special rule that will help solar, and all it does is break it off at the knees.
Hey, thanks for using the board with numbers. I'd like to ask you about one possible alternative to individual solar. I don't know where it is in New Hampshire. It's community solar. I think years ago, a guy named Andrew Keller was trying to do this with NH Solar Garden. Did that go anywhere? Where are we now?
Totally subject to policy and legislature here in the state. Net metering changes have put little snafus within kind of the relationship between host meter or solar garden owner, if you would, so community solar owner, and their members, right? So really the hang up here in New Hampshire is just been a factor of the economics and the policy that's here in place. It takes some money to invest and to find the property. It takes money to invest and to install the equipment. And then to go from there and scale something to an appropriate level where you have a production facility that has members paying for their share of that. That structure has just been a little difficult to work with here in New Hampshire. Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont have all had a little bit easier time around us to do that. George alluded to it earlier. We don't have the friendliest state for solar at the moment for a few reasons. But, aside from that, we see good things coming. But on the community solar side, as a company, Revision's consistently tried to get the ball rolling on that stuff. And you get almost a home plate and things just run awry on those things. So it's there. It's constantly working in the background. There are a lot of companies trying to pencil it out right now. We're one of them. But there's some difficulty there for sure.
It's important to understand and think about this for a second. Is there an advantage to the utility company to have solar? Yes, we'll do it scientifically. Yes, there is an advantage to them for there to be lots of solar? Or no? Okay. All the no's, you're wrong. Okay? And let me tell you, let me give you a great example. Florida, FLP, Florida Light and Power is probably in the next 3 years going to be the largest owner of solar in the country. If not number one, it's going to be way up there. Why in the world would the utility company invest in solar? Because it makes money. The question is, who's going to control the money? Now, the utility companies want you to believe that they know better. And I'm going to go really political here because you're going to have politicians here. So I might as well make that a quick one. It makes money for the utility companies, for you and me to put solar at our house. Now, how can that be? When is the prime time when solar produces? What hours of the day? Yeah, 9 to 3, 10 to 2, whatever you want. Okay? But those are the peak hours. In the evening, nobody cares. Last August, there were 2 nights where the power pool had so much power that the utility companies were actually paid 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour to take power off the grid. That's crazy, right? You and I didn't get any free power during that time, but the utility companies did. So there's a couple of things like that that's important. Why have more solar? It's because by you supplementing the grid during the peak power hours when solar produces the most power, you're actually helping the utility company not to have to purchase more infrastructure, more and bigger power utility production companies. We got, and I live, a moment's breath from if Seabrook ever goes. I mean, I feel I'm really fortunate. I'm so close. It's going to be instant. It's not going to matter. Okay, if I lived 20 miles, I'd be worried. But I am that close. Living on the seacoast. So when you think of it, you think about why is it financially advantageous to the utility company? And the answer is because you're helping them not to have to buy peak power for summer air conditioning, which is the largest producer. During the course of a workday, everybody turns their lights on at work, they turn their air conditioners, they turn their machines, all of those things. That's when solar can help the utility companies. And they're very parochial, very narrow-minded in not understanding the benefit that solar gives to them because they're able to get levelized power, but sell it to people at a much higher rate during the day.
So some of the power companies do understand this, and I read a story about Vermont Power where they introduced a program to allow consumers in Vermont to get a power wall for a significantly reduced price, practically free. I think it was $500 or something like that, or $1,000 compared to the normal $5,000 to $8,000 to have a power wall installed. And I don't remember what the numbers were for how much they spent on it, but I did hear that in the first summer that they had those installed, that in the month of July alone, they recouped 50% of what they spent putting those power walls in one month. So the battery backup, when it gets to the point where it is more cost effective, is good for both the consumers and for the power companies, because all that solar that's produced can be stored and used, and then there's no firing of any coal plants or propane plants or anything like that. And the electric companies that see this coming are going to be able to take a better advantage of it, which should in fact over time also help the consumers and the Vermont consumers that got a super cheap power wall. That was an awesome deal for them, and they're helping the Vermont Power spend less money and burn less fossil fuels.
Liberty Utilities here in the state is doing a very similar pilot program where they're giving 200 power walls to their customer base. And Georgia mentioned earlier a thing called time of use rates, letting us have a varying rate throughout the day depending on the urgency on that power. So as we see those things happen more, Green Mountain Power in Vermont, great example. Everybody's looking at that going, hey, wait a minute, it works? And so now you have a small utility in our state, Liberty Utilities, going, hey, I think we'll try it too. Well, the big guys, the Eversources and, CMP for Maine and all these other National Grid down in Massachusetts, they're big, they're hesitant. So they let the little guys play, and the little guys will learn where they're saving their money. So it's neat. We're seeing this all develop in front of us now, and 5, 6, 7 years from now, we'll see this shift where the battery becomes a real big focus for all of us, because there will be some economic return, because we're going to be able to say to the utility, hey, do you want my power? And we'll be able to sell it to them. The theory, the idea is what's called a virtual power plant. The reason these utilities are doing this is because basically, as George had said, we're helping them. They won't admit it in most cases, right? We're helping them being a solar homeowner, providing electricity, producing it ourselves. But now, if we can store it in our home and allow them the access to dispatch the energy when they need it, that's a lot of power for them, right? So there's a lot of value there. That's why it's really working well in states like California that have their time of use rates. That's why you see Green Mountain Power, as what Ed said, is really working out. And Liberty Utilities will go through the exercise. It'll work really well for them. And then the state's going to look at it and will go, oh, this worked.
Okay, the next question is on your right, this gentleman here.
I have a question based on highly technical stuff that I saw the other day. You all know where it is. It's this old house. They were examining wires from a rooftop solar installation that had been chewed by squirrels. And evidently the squirrels were teething, and so they really liked the idea of this. It wasn't because it was tasty, I guess. But my question becomes, what have you to report from your installations, and is either a different kind of insulation in the offing or conduit that will resist animals?
There are different squirrel guards, if you would, critter guards you can put around your array. Usually when I go to a home, I'm looking to see, do we have trees? Do we have things that overhang our roof? Is it going to be easy to get a little critter on our roof, right? Our experience, it exists. It happens. It is something that you should think about. So that's one of the things that I'll like to bring up. Not only the squirrel, birds like to use it as a nesting spot as well. So again, critter guards, different things. In terms of, is there protection via a conduit? George can attest to this, but as we're under, Ed can too, he's been on there. He's wrapped all the wires up. You end up having your leads from a solar panel. Each solar panel has 2 leads that come off it and need to connect as they run down the rails on your roof, your racking structure that holds the solar panels. Wire management is what we call it, right? So within the industry, wire management is a big deal. And watching how you do that in terms of really just maintaining that your wires are not free. They're not hanging down. They're kept tight. They're nice and bundled, if you would. That helps prevent some of it. But yes, there are actions that as time goes on, you start to learn and see things, and you start to try to nip them in the bud ahead of time. But again, kind of the sites of checking out a site ahead of time. What do we have in proximity to the roof? Do we have it in a situation where maybe we should recommend kind of a mesh guard around that array to eliminate getting any of those critters in there? Kind of those are what's available to us today. I don't know, George, what do you have on that?
We did our first pest abatement, if you would, probably 7 years ago. It wasn't a system that we'd installed, the company gone out of business. And we went in there and put up some product called Squirrel Guard. Really easy, adhesive backing, got some, and there's another company called Bird Be Gone who produces some wonderful products. Last year, we had our largest number of people, both from our installations and others, for pest abatement of some kind. A Next Amp, who used to be really big in this area until they did strictly commercial, had installed their residential and their residential solar array, and then just didn't maintain that kind of stuff. So we stepped in and assisted them, and we added Bird Be Gone. Now, Bird Be Gone has, and I was going to draw some magic pictures, but we're not going to be able to do that. It'll come down. But basically, it's a bunch of spikes in this marvelous strip, and you just install it. She had pigeons that were waking them up at about 3:30 every morning. They'd had enough. And so we installed that Bird Be Gone products. And you'll see if you ever look, Bird Be Gone, there's a number of products. Squirrel Guard is another great one. Which is kind of there's two different companies who make those kind of squirrel guards. 3 years ago, we had our largest thing, I think, in my lifetime, largest number of acorns. Route 125, there was an area just last summer that I forget what it was called, but it was like squirrel death. I mean, there were hundreds of squirrels that were just all over the road. So we knew that trouble might be brewing, and sure enough, it was. We had 3 last year in which people had them, and so this year we've been much more cognizant. Every time we do an installation now, we're looking where overhanging branches are. We never used to do that. But that is being added to a lot of our customers where it's really critical. Why spend to have to redo and then spend the money again, for the guard? And sometimes they'll chew through. I mean, there's something about the wires that must be awful tasty. I haven't tried it yet, but I understand it must be great if you go in those squirrel circles. So it's just one of those things that they will chew the optimizer lines, they will chew panel wires, whatever they can sink their teeth into. They love this stuff. And so the Squirrel Guard goes around, and there's no way that they're getting at this stuff. So it's a wonderful product. And then the third thing, which people don't think about, but we see a lot in commercial products, we do occasionally in residential, but somebody, I have a slate roof, and when snow comes off, you can hear it. It's like a freight train coming through. It just all comes off at once. With solar, if you have a reasonable incline, it's going to do the same thing. You'll hear all of a sudden, boom. Well, that's great unless you have a doorway where your children are playing, okay, or grandchildren are playing, or your workers are walking in and out of the door. And so there's this company in Vermont called Alpine Snow Guard who produces a wonderful product or set of products that are designed to do snow retention. It really keeps the snow on the roof. A lot of companies have been using that kind of stuff for years. Now they've got special versions of that are work with solar with solar, so that they work super and they keep it from killing people or destroying cars, et cetera, et cetera.
I was just curious about where these solar cells are made, and do we know the environmental impact of these solar cells, the manufacturing of these arrays?
It used to be that we had American manufacturers. We had a couple like 2. I think there's only 1 left that actually produce. For example, a Sharp, even though a Japanese panel, used to be producing solar cells in America, in Tennessee. They got out of the business. They couldn't afford to stay in it. They couldn't compete, which was sad. First Solar is still alive and produces stuff. Those are American made. Most everybody else is using cells that are made overseas, primarily China, some from Japan, some from Malaysia, and some from Korea. Yes. And then, of course, you have American assembly that's going on. So we have a lot of manufacturers who just don't make the cells, but they're assembled here. So anyway, as I said, most of them are coming from China. Even for the American manufacturers today, it's an unfortunate thing, but that's the way life is.
Are there still some in Canada? There used to be some there.
I don't know that there were ever anybody that made them in Canada. There were names of like Canadian Solar, but the only thing that was Canadian was the warehouse in Vancouver that they shipped from China to.
Yeah, the cells themselves, as George said, most of the Asian market. A lot of what we see filter into the States here is more the Malaysia, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore. So again, we're still seeing from that market. Not much is truly produced here when we start talking about the raw silicon from the start of the cell. The industry doesn't exist. China's really kind of curbed that market. In terms of the environmental impact, though, again, much like the battery, we're mining earth elements, right? We're still excavating something from the earth. We're still digging. With that said, when we look at the power production capable from a solar panel versus burning a fossil fuel that has been extracted from the ground, you're getting far less impact from that panel produced because it has a duration. And that duration, right now we know is warranted for a certain time, but again, it goes well beyond that. So again, as we look at things and we want to compare kind of an apples to apples or apples to oranges, if you would, the environmental impact that a solar panel has is far less than any fossil fuel extracted from the ground. And then again, we look at the European market now that it is starting to do some form of recycling. They're pulling the aluminum out of the panel. They're pulling the glass out of the panel. They're starting to pull the silicon back out of the panel. So again, we're starting to see a full life cycle of these items now, and we know that from a fossil fuel, we can't recycle our fuel. You know, once we've burnt it, we've burnt it. It's in the atmosphere. So it's a really good concern, and because this industry is so rooted in that environmental side, we're keenly aware of it, and it's a newer industry, so that's something that's kind of always looked at.
All right, so our last non-Tesla related question is in the back here.
We're in a zone currently where, New Hampshire that is, where we have about a 5% per year risk of a hurricane making landfall. In 10 years, maybe that number is going to be 10%. I'm not worried about that dimension, but I am worried about what happens if the landfalls that do occur here, instead of being category 1, are category 2. Do people lose their roofs when they wouldn't have otherwise? Or are there other aspects of the installation of an array that do or don't yet take account of what we currently think of as extraordinary winds that won't be so extraordinary in a decade or two?
On a typical roof installation, composite shingle with a flashing that is making sure it can't leak and all that good stuff. A 3-inch screw into soft pine or hemlock. It's into the rafter is securing it. Now I don't know what the uplift force that a shingle will handle on a bare roof, but I do know that a solar panel attached to racking, which is attached to this bolt that's going through the roof into the rafter, is going to hold over 600 pounds for uplift. Okay? So, which is going to survive? If you're going to put solar panels on and you live near the beach, as I do, not too far, okay, then I would insist that the solar installer put a third center rail on all ends. It's not going to blow from the center. It's going to blow from the ends. If it lifts, it's then going to go pop, 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 pop. Okay, so the way around that is you simply add a center rail, and that keeps the ends from ever lifting up. So when we do a beach installation, as we've done down in Hampton Beach, within a block, we're always on the end of everything, putting a center rail to make sure that's never coming off the roof. The roof will come off first. So I hope that answers the question.
The problem with the roof is not the solar panels, it's the vented attic. So that's why in Florida, where they do have real hurricanes, the wind comes in, it comes in the edge of the gutter, and it goes up and simply blows the roof off because the roofs are vented, which is why the new building codes in Florida say you cannot have an unvented roof in the future. So that's the real problem with hurricanes and roofs. It's not the solar panels.
All right, they're on overtime now, so with that, I guess I'll ask you to thank our panel. Thank you. It was really good. And I'll thank all of you for your support. We really do appreciate it. So thanks for coming. Hope to see you in January and appreciate it.
Thank you.